Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. I am Þórdís Elva. I am the chair and co-founder of the Nordic Digital Rights and Equality Foundation, which is a mouthful. So from this point on in the presentation, we'll just go by NORDREF. And it's very good to see you this morning. The last time we did an event, it was about sexual privacy in a digital world, and we staged it in the city theater of Iceland, but it was at the peak of COVID, so we were only allowed an audience of one at that point. And imagine being the person that is hand-selected to be the entire audience of an event that was mainly about dick pics. So talk about rising to the occasion, and that task ended up being solved quite gallantly by the First Lady of Iceland. So thank you, Eliza Reid, for taking that for the team. And for those of you who are here today, you are filling some pretty big shoes, and we expect a lot from you after that experience. And today, NORDREF is proudly presenting the fruits of nearly 3 years of our labor that allowed us to profile and effectively map the perpetrators behind online abuse against women and girls in the Nordic region. And we will talk more about dick pics, and just to get the visual experience of that out of the way, here is the one and only dick pic you'll see during this presentation. And when I ran this by my colleague Christian, who will stand on stage today and present some results to us, he told me, "Oh, I have 42,000 dick pics on my computer," he goes. And then he immediately follows by, "Oh, not mine." And then he immediately says, "It was for another research." And I thought, this is the occupational hazard of doing what we do. But we will also dissect the perpetrators behind the unlawful threats online. And I know for a fact, knowing some of the faces in the audience today, that you know that by heart. For women, these threats often mean being threatened with rape or death. We will profile the perpetrators of image-based sexual abuse, which is sharing nude photos, real or fake, of other people without their consent. And we have a reason to believe that this type of digital violence will increase exponentially with the advancement of AI, proven by the fact that it took us 0.3 seconds to create a convincing nude photo of yours truly using an AI app that offers users a free trial to violate the sexual privacy of others, which is deeply concerning. The research that we're about to present today was funded by the Nordic Gender Equality Fund, NIC, to which we owe our warmest gratitude, and we also want to thank RIK, which is the Icelandic Institute for Gender Equality and Difference that is co-hosting today's event with us. We thank police and court authorities with which we collaborated for the purposes of this research. And last but not least, part of our data was collected by workers of victim shelters and counseling centers, including ROX in Sweden, Dansk Kvinnesamfunds Krisecenter in Denmark, Stegamot, Bjarkarliden, Kvennathvarur shelters in Iceland, and we could not have done this without you. The people who are busy saving the lives of abuse victims, who seek out the services of these shelters, yet found the time to collect crucial data for this research. And you know who you are. You're in this room, some of you, and you are the honorary guests of today. And you do deserve a round of applause, so thank you so much. We're gonna run this event for 2 hours without a break, just as a little bit of housekeeping. We are streaming this to an international audience as we speak, and the recording will be made available on our site, nordref.org, as well as on our social media channels. But without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, who's Christian Mogensen. He is a NORDREF board member and an expert on digital issues and a self-proclaimed expert on the angry men of the internet. He authored the well-known Angry Internet Report, and he's here to give us sort of the joint overall results from Iceland, Denmark, and Sweden on the people behind the online gender-based abuse in today's world. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you so much, Þórdís, and thank you so much for you for showing up. It's Monday, it's winter break in Iceland, and it's fairly early, so we really, truly do appreciate all of you coming here. So what we wanted to do was basically to understand what is the problem we're trying to deal with, what is the gendered violence, how does it affect women, how does it affect men, and we wanted to do so in order to basically create a better world, maybe even potentially save it. It's a tall order. We're a research group of 3.5 people, but this is the kind of endeavor that we must do, that we are tasked to do. And we did so by reaching out to national police, courts and domestic abuse shelters, counseling centers, and victim survivor shelters in Iceland, Denmark, and Sweden. Gather the data, compare the data in order to understand, is this an Icelandic problem? Is it a gendered problem? Is it a global problem? What is the problem exactly that we're trying to solve? Because when we've been working with this, all of us for a combined, closing in on a century, we find that everybody kind of knows that this is a problem. No one in this room, no one on the stream is aware that, is this really a problem, like gender abuse, gendered violence, sexualized violence, is it really a problem? We all know that it is, but it's sometimes hard to pinpoint what exactly is the problem. Is the problem the dick pic? Is the problem the social environment that affords the dick pic? Is the problem the impunity of punishment that most men thrive in when doing this online misogynistic violence? Like, what is the problem exactly is key to understanding also how can we solve it. And I'm gonna offer up all the slides for anybody who might want to read them, so I'm not gonna do death by PowerPoint on you by having a wall of text and then reading it onto you. But when we talk about, like, is this really a problem? We can see in our data that we are talking about percentages of populations suffering digital image-based sexual assault, being sent dick pics, being sent unlawful threats, and so on. Like, we're talking about not an individual problem, but something that affects 1 to up to 20% of the population in some of the most gender egalitarian societies in the world. Like, if we have a problem in Denmark, Sweden, and Iceland, think about the rest of the world. I live in Silicon Valley, in the US. Like, make of that what you will. If it's a problem here, I'm very, very sure that when I go back home, like, we can multiply this by 10, at least. So when we talk about the theoretical framework, we're basically talking about case-by-case examples that bear evidence to the fact that we've known for years that anywhere between 58 and 75% of women in the Nordic countries self-censor or abstain from participating in public debate because of the fear of suffering threats, receiving dick pics, any other unwarranted gendered or sexual, let's be generous and call it attention, or just to have AI naked imagery of themselves made and thrown onto the internet, because if we can sexualize a woman, well, then she doesn't have a voice. It's like any sort of self-censoring or abstaining from participating in the public democratic debate is not only a problem for her, but it's also a problem for democracy in itself, because if democracy is not representative, which it's not if women abstain from participating in it, then it's not democracy. Then it's, I don't know, Handmaid's Tale 2.0. And we don't want that. We know this is a problem. Theory, history, cases, experience for most of the research group shows us that this is still very much a problem. That being said, we work extensively in data. Data is not always good. We kind of always, as researchers, want to make data into something like infallible, bulletproof. It's not. We're working with data across 3 different Nordic countries, meaning that the data we get from Denmark is gathered from a certain set of penal codes, a certain cultural environment, from even like a police clerk that had a Monday when we inquired about the data. Compare that to Sweden, compare that to Iceland. We don't have comparative data, which is also a problem. We're going to get back to that in recommendations. We don't have any sort of comparative framework across the Nordic countries in order to understand what is gendered violence. We don't know. Like there's Danish gendered violence, which is somehow different than Icelandic gendered violence, which is third thing to Swedish gendered violence. Again, we roll back to this. We all kind of know what gendered violence is, but we don't know on paper. And we had wildly differing success rates in regard to accessing the data in the three countries. But we'll get back to that in the country reports. The way we did this was basically we reached out to police. We reached out to police in order to get reports of gendered violence. We reached out to courts to get verdicts, and we reached out to survivor shelters and counseling centers in order to get, let's call it, testimonies and case examples of this gendered violence, and then we compared it. When we gathered the police reports, we asked the national police institutions for 150 reports based in three categories that we saw before: unlawful threats, image-based sexual abuse, and sexual harassments with the respective penal codes in the countries. And then we gathered 50. We tried to gather 50 police reports in each category and then read through them manually to find out who is this done unto, but more importantly for our research, who's doing it, why are they doing it, in which situation, and so on and so forth. And when we get into data, a few very interesting things came to light. But the most important thing for me as a researcher and as an activist, I want to say activist in training, out of respect for some of the people in the room who've been doing this for a lifetime. Slight digression. Understanding the magnitude of this problem came to life for me in Iceland in 2018 or 19 during the Me Too Moving Forward conference that was held here. We were having a dinner for all of the speakers. I've been giving like a presentation on dick pics sent by angry men, angry dick pics. And I was seated at a table with politicians, first ladies, reporters, journalists, kick-ass activists from all over the world. And someone brought up, oh yeah, I received a dick pic this morning when I wrote on Twitter that I was going to do this talk. And I was like, oh my God, that is terrible. Like, how do you, because it sounds appalling for me as a white heterosexual male to receive a dick pic in my inbox. I'm not used to that. And everybody else around the table was like halfway into the meat and potatoes, like, oh yeah, sure, yeah, this morning, yeah. I think I got one now on my Apple Watch. And like, it was just the basic, like, oh yeah, sure, like that happens. Yeah, as a white male, that is wild. I received my first dick pic in 2020, and I felt like I had been adopted into a club. I had been given a talk about male feminism. Someone sent me a dick pic and was like, you're a fucking gay person for doing this. And I was like, aw, you noticed me. And I was doing a research project that Tortis briefly mentioned in Denmark, where I reached out to Danish female politicians and media personalities and said, have you received any dick pics? Would you be willing to share? We're trying to find out why men sent them. And everybody was like, oh yeah, sure. Like I have a hard drive, I have gigabytes. So that was interesting. Because again, I know it's a problem. I've known it's a problem. I didn't know it was a problem. One issue we got with the police data and the court data in the Nordic countries was that gender is not a protected characteristic. If we had wanted to research how many people of color are targeted for the color of their skin, there would be like readily available data sets. We can do that, but we don't have that if it's gender. And meaning that it is basically free of charge and even of social guilt to attack a woman on her femininity or lack thereof, on her gender, on her level of sexualization. Like that's fine as long as you don't mention the tone of her skin or her any disability or sickness, illnesses and stuff like that. They're not victims, they're just women. Seems to be like the overlying headline when doing data work in this. When we got to the shelter data, the most important thing we saw was this is a problem for everybody. Across the Nordic countries, if you're suffering any level of domestic abuse or domestic violence, you are, I think like with 80% certainty, also suffering digital violence or abuse. Like, it's a tool, it's a means to an end. It's not a digital issue. It's not like cybercrime sounds like crime watered down. It's not. Cyberspace have just become a tool that are used in order to punish those that you target. And when that's gendered, like, it's not less of a crime. No one has centralized this data before for reasons unbeknownst to us, but we see in all of our data this is very much a problem. When comparing the national data, we see that gendered violence and abuse is wildly rampant, if not prevalent, in all of the Nordic countries. This is happening everywhere. Like I started out by saying, we're talking about percentages of the overall population, like 2% of the whole population. If we say only the female population, well, then it's 4 to 5%. If we say only the female population between 15 and 70, well, then it jumps up to about 8 or 9%. If we talk about women in high school or university, well, then it's about 35 to 40%. Like, this is not a small issue. But we've been talking about it for so long in activist circles that we know. But every time that we go public with this, we're met with exactly one question. Well, how big a problem is it really? Like, can't she just turn off her Facebook? Can't she just not be on Snapchat? Can't she just not have a digital expression of her sexuality? Which sort of seems like a backwards way of solving this problem. Like going to the victims and telling them, well, if you're in a car crash, then don't go on the road. The amount of people suffering these crimes and this abuse in the Nordic countries ranged anywhere from between 30 to the mid-40s of the total reports. If you report a crime concerning threats, harassment, or sexual abuse with like a 30 to 40% certainty, there's a digital aspect to that crime. That means that out of all the reports that we have from Denmark and Iceland, more than 17,000 people over a 5-year period have been victims of digital sexualized crimes. That is like 3,500 people per year on average across the Nordic countries or across Denmark and Iceland. That is a fuck ton of people, pardon my French. When we talk about the gender of perpetrators and victims, it is almost exclusively men doing it unto women when we talk about sexual digital crimes and abuse. No one in here is going like, oh, I did not know that. We know. Shocker. Because the only sexuality that is weaponized is the female sexuality. Like, we can shame women for being too sexual or not sexual enough if we have evidence of her sexuality, if it has been portrayed on video, audio, imagery. Like, we can shame her. Like, that is the modern scarlet letter. Like, we can brand a woman as a whore, regarding that, well, she's been a whore with someone, and he's king shit. But that is the reason why we see male onto female violence in these aspects. Regarding the motivation, we saw across all the Nordic countries that when it came to sexual harassment, usually the crime or the abuse was done as sort of a misguided attempt of flirtation or as baiting, which was a term that Tortis introduced me to. Thank you so much for that. Baiting means, and often sexual harassment would be sending someone a dick pic. If someone doesn't know, a dick pic is a picture, usually digital, of your penis. And then you send it to someone for different motivations. What we usually saw in these cases was that a dick pic was sent either as a way to gauge the waters, like, I have this one, could you maybe be interested in this? I would like to give it to you. Or as sort of a broad net cast onto attractive women that you know. We saw multiple cases of someone sending 20, 30 dick pics to all the women they know and just hoping that someone would pick up on it and be like, yeah, sure, why not? Disregarding, I'm 36, I feel so old when we do this job. Disregarding the 29 people that you send it to who very much do not want an image of your dick in their inbox. But again, we talk about the objectification of women. Like, they are just a recipient for my hopeful sexual endeavors. And then I can, without impunity, send dick pics on Snapchat because it disappears in 10 seconds. And, well, if she doesn't like it, is it really my fault? Shouldn't she just have been more sexual? When we talk about threats, they are usually done as part of a conflict. The conflict escalates into sexualized threats. I'm going to rape you, I'm going to do this and this in front of your family, and so on, image-based sexual abuse was usually done by someone who had been in a mutually consensual sexual relationship. Maybe they'd forwarded images of themselves, they'd recorded videos, and then when they split up, or at worst, when she leaves him, he's like, well, I have this evidence that you've been sexual, and if you don't do as I want, I'm gonna tell the whole world that we had sex. And somehow that's meant to diminish her value and raise his. And it works. Because we see across the nationalities that even though dick pics are sent for different motivations, even though like they're received differently, there is a difference in digital adoption across the Nordic countries, there is a difference in sexual openness across the Nordic countries. This has an effect. And we see it as a problem because almost no one in our questionnaires said that they felt rightfully treated when going to the police or the digital platforms, and that they had abstained from some sort of action, some sort of gesture, some sort of part of life because of this. And when we talk about the victim shelters and the counseling centers, all of what they said was that I left someone, or I am actively trying to leave someone, but they are threatening with calling me this and this and this and proving that I am all of this. And that sort of struck a chord with me because all of the words that they used, it was always like, no matter if it was in Icelandic or Swedish or Danish, it was, he's threatening with calling me, and then English words like a whore or a slut, all of these things. All of those words were exactly the same that we found in the 6 billion data points large data set that we built for the report The Angry Internet. Women are called the same in Denmark, in Sweden, in Iceland, in the US, in everywhere in the world. So either there's a global pandemic of misogyny and misogynistic phrases, or we actually see some of these cases tapping into these angry internet groups that we found in this report, where we saw a lot of jaded lovers uploading a story about their ex-wife, their ex-lover, or their coworker who did not want to have sex with them at the Christmas party, and they said, she's such a slut because she doesn't want to have sex with me. Can someone, the irony is not lost on me. And then, can we do something about it? And here's her Facebook, here's some naked images of her, internet, do your thing. And then this gendered violence that used to be done in the privacy of one's own home was done in the privacy of chat groups, Discord groups, and like the large internet, until it spills over. And then it's not one image you're trying to get off the internet, then it's 40,000 instances of that one image. What we saw in The Angry Internet, what is mirrored in the work that we've done here, is that this, can I call it misguided, bastardized activism of the internet, is often done by younger male users. Often the original poster will be older, he can be like 25 to 45, but we see like the groups gathering this and running with it are usually younger, like somewhere between 15 to 20. And they are acting very much on their own accord. There is not one dude sitting in the back pulling the strings. No, this is just like an undercurrent of hatred of women that is done onto the internet. And that kind of begets the question, are men evil? There's a level of self-reflection in this for me that is like very, very clear. But historically, men have, I say that as a like new feminist, feminist and training activist, whatever, that I understand that I come from a background where men are inherently the breadwinner, we're the defender, like the physical, strong Viking defender of the family, of the woman, the moral head of the family, and all of these, like these stereotypes have been at the core of societal gender debate for at least the last 20 years, probably 40, like 100 years in some countries. Regretfully, men understand this. Like, we're good. When I talk to men who don't consider themselves feminists or activists or anywhere on that spectrum, they're like, oh yeah, we know that we're wrong. That's why we're changing. Like, the women, the left wing, are coming to change us. We just don't, we know that we're wrong. We don't know how to be right. And then we look onto the internet. Like, if you Google how to be a good man, there is, oh, I love that reaction. Yeah, he fucking sucks. But then you don't get good answers, but you do get loud answers. We're living in the digital age, like the age of engagement, quantifiable engagement. And when you have someone who's not right, but who's very, very, very loud, you pay attention to them. And if you don't have a recipe to be a good man, either you can go into yourself and be like, have I done wrong onto people? That is not a pleasant conversation. Or you can listen to someone who gives you very simple answers to very complex questions. Andrew Tate is masterful at that. And he has churned out an industry of bullshit masculinity, alpha male, dude bro coaches who will tell you how to become an alpha male, how to stop being a nice guy, how to, like the bottom right corner says, like, stop being a little bitch and just take what's rightfully yours. And like it provokes a level of male identity that is eerily effective. Like you posit women as the others, as the enemy, as someone you need to combat, someone you need to control. Like one of the screenshots says, if she's on Instagram, she's cheating. Like that's a healthy outlook on wanting women to be sexual. But we're called into a level of modern masculinity where it's nice, not just for men, for women alike, for non-binaries as well, to be a fighter, to be part of a culture, to have this like band of brothers, someone you can discuss the plight of your gender with. That is amazing. Like that is super fucking important. I've been part of locker room talks, obviously. I've been doing like kickboxing, Muay Thai for years. Like the level of masculinity and masculine advice you can get when you're 22 and in a shit kicker village somewhere in Denmark, you don't know how to flirt. So you ask someone who is older than you, how do I flirt? Where do you get a lot of men together? Usually in the locker room or in sporting groups. And someone will have an answer. Not a good answer, but a very loud one. And this sort of becomes therapy by proxy for modern men. We don't have a good answer, we don't have good guides, we don't have good role models, but we have very loud ones. And it's a way to deal with our issues. We have a ton of issues. We know we're doing wrong. But it's a very delicate, it's a very vulnerable conversation to have. Who have I hurt? I don't want to talk about that. I want to be told she deserved it. Like that is a psychologically more palpable explanation or conversation to have. So men go into these groups also to receive any sort of emotional validation. We place women, feminism as a omnipotent enemy that we need to combat. Otherwise, they're going to come and get us. Women want men to be castrated. Women want men to drink oat milk. Women want men to become vegan. Like they want to make us less masculine because then women can take over the workforce. Women can take over like the money, the family. She's going to take our kids. She's going to take our jobs. All of these things, like women are simultaneously extremely scary whilst also being extremely fragile and like small, feminine, dainty things that we need to put on a pedestal and then like treat as a queen, a housewife, or a handmaid, if you will. And by establishing this omnipotent enemy, this need for a band of brothers feeling with the other men, we also alleviate ourselves of any pressure for becoming better. We don't need to grow as people because we are just fighting an enemy, and in rules of engagement in a war, anything goes. This is the perfect fucking storm for the online misogyny that we're seeing. And I say this as a man who have been through this process, it's an extremely difficult conversation to have with yourself and those around you because the answer is not nice. We're not heroes, we're not fighters when doing this. Like the locker room talk, as much as it is comfortable in the situation, it's kind of the same as eating a like McDonald's cheeseburger on the way home. It's an immediate relief of uncomfortableness, but you feel so bad afterwards. And you can push that feeling of badness away from you by just keeping on doing it. So to summarize, we have a big fucking problem. We're gaining traction in order to understand what the solutions must be. But we do see across all three countries that there is indisputable proof that gendered violence has gone digital. The digitization of violence is still violence at its core, but the digital aspect affords perpetrators an opportunity or even perceived impunity of punishment to carry out revenge fantasies and other gendered crimes. Toris and I was talking about, like, this is not new. She leaves him and he is angry because that is an attack not just on his emotions, but on his masculinity. How dare she leave me? 20 years ago, you might go and slash her tires or, like, I don't know, throw a brick through her window. Today, that seems like a big deal. You have to find a knife, you have to, like, find her new flat, all of these things. It's difficult having revenge on your ex. So if you instead can just go with this one and just be like, doop, 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 I'm just gonna put this on Discord or wherever, it removes any barrier of entry. It's immediate, it can be, like, very, very spontaneous. And if you in the back of your mind knows, no one's gonna prosecute this because it is just on Snapchat, you also speak into a very, very destructive judicial resilience that digital perpetrators will have. You're bulletproof when you do it online, and it is so much easier than finding out where she parked her car. What we need to do in order to, in any way, shape, or form, stem this problem is, first of all, to, across the Nordic countries, across all countries, understand digital crimes are crimes. We need to treat online violations and abuse as part of the same crime scene. It doesn't matter if he was sitting at home or at the library when he was doing it, if he was doing it on Snapchat or on Facebook or any other sort of digital environment. Cyberspace is a crime scene. If we don't categorize and catalog it as such, this is always going to be one of those, I know it's a problem, but I can't prove that it's a problem kind of things. We need to understand, now I come at you as an activist, as a partner to a woman, as part of this research group, to understand that this problem concerns us all. Men suffer this as well, like this toxic masculinity, Andrew Tate-ification of being a young man. But that fucking sucks. No one wants to do it. But it's the only option we have. We need to show men that there is more to life than what color is your Bugatti or a mediocre kickboxing record. Like, we are better than this. Don't reduce me, don't reduce my gender to any sort of portrayal of that sort of idiocy. I'm better than that, and we're better than that. We need to understand that in order for this to be a societal problem and not just something that happens onto women. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christian. You've given us much to think about after that presentation. I would love to dwell on it, but time does not allow for it. We do not now have to segue into our next speaker, which is Moa Bladini. She is a professor at the Gothenburg University in Sweden of criminal law. She was the head researcher of our Swedish portion of this report and research. And she will, followed by her findings, the major key findings that she will present from Sweden, she will be questioned, she'll be asked a couple of questions by David Brax, who is the senior advisor at the Swedish Gender Equality Institute. Now, Moa could not be with us today, so this is a pre-recorded segment, and we will play it commencing now. Here you have Moa Bladini.
Dear all, honored guests. My name is Moa Bladini. I'm an associate professor in criminal law at the Department of Law at Gothenburg University. I've been the PI for the Swedish part of this research project, and I will now share with you the most important aspects of this specific Swedish part of our report. When it comes to the analysis of the results from the police reports, this is about what we know. 80% was known and male. A majority were about 20 to 50 years old. A majority of them were ex-partners of the ones committed breach of privacy, so spreading nude pictures, etc. When it came to unlawful threat, about 25% were partner or ex-partner. And when it came to sexual harassments, which then were sending dick pics or other intimate images, it was only 10% partner or ex-partner. But on the other hand, it was a large amount of the perpetrator of sexual harassment that were unknown or a stranger to the victim survivor, so more than 50%. But on the other hand, when it came to the other two crimes, unlawful threat and unlawful breach of privacy, which was spreading nude pictures, etc., it was only about 5% of those that were strangers or unknown. And we also looked into then the situation or motive. We can say more about the situation these offenses occurred in than the exact motive behind the offense. But what we know is that in the cases of unlawful breach of privacy, meaning spreading nude pictures and images and videos, and unlawful threats about doing such things, about 50% happened or took place in instances of separation or when the perpetrator were rejected by the victim survivor. Whereas when it came to sexual harassment, sending dick pics, it was only 5% occurring in the situation of separation or rejection. We also found that other types of conflicts were quite common, especially in terms of unlawful threat, but also in situations where the perpetrator spread nude images or videos, meaning unlawful breach of privacy. Also interesting or sad, but it's important to note that another situation that were quite common, especially in terms of sexual harassment, the dick pics, but also the unlawful breach of privacy, spreading nude pictures or videos. A large part seemed to be just randomly or just for fun as the reason or situation where this happened. And also I want to highlight that unlawful threats to a large extent consisted of repeated or combinations of other forms of harassment too, and very often ongoing for a quite long time. When it came to breach of privacy, meaning spreading nude pictures and videos, these cases were to a large extent committed by the same offender using various forms of harassment and threats, including physical violence. Results from the judgments. So in these cases, between 75 and 100% were known and male. And the perpetrators were quite young. A majority of them in all three situations or crimes were under 40. And when it came to sexual harassment, the vast majority were under 30 years old. Between 15 and 70% were partners or ex-partners, more common when it came to breach of privacy and unlawful threat than sexual harassment, meaning spreading dick pics.
And unlawful threat and sexual harassments were sometimes committed by a stranger or unknown, whereas when it came to breach of privacy, spreading nude pictures and images, none of them were strangers or unknown in the judgments. The situation or motive is relatively similar to what we saw in the police reports. So, separation or rejection was very common, about 50% in all of those three type of crimes. So this is different when these cases of sexual harassment are reported to the police. It's a smaller amount about separation or rejection than in courts. So probably many of the cases that are not occurring in separations or in relation to rejections, they don't go to court. But it could also be, when it comes to sexual harassment, it seems like crossing or testing friendship borders is quite common, but that did not occur in any of the cases for the other two crimes. And when it came to do things or committing those crimes randomly or just for fun, it seemed like it happened in all those three cases, but less common using unlawful threat. So please note that unlawful threats to a large extent were repeated and combined with other forms of harassment using different mediums. Breach of privacy to a large extent were committed just for fun or randomly, and some offended several victims. And sexual harassments often seem performed randomly or just for fun. So this is a conclusion for the Swedish part, who and why. Police reports show us that when it comes to the sexual harassment, it's a male, he's between 20 and 40 years old, but 45% are unknown or a stranger. So why? Just for fun or randomly or just unknown. And the most common medium is Snapchat and Facebook. And if you look into the same type of crime, but in judgments, the male is between 20 and 60 years old, so a little bit older, and he's most often acquainted, so not a stranger, but acquainted. And he is crossing friendship borders or just doing this randomly. And the most common platform or medium is messages or Snapchat. For unlawful threat, in the police reports, it's 90%, it's a male. He is between 20 and 50 years old, and he is also acquainted to the victim, survivor. It's very often in a separation due to jealousy and rejection. And it is performed on Messenger and Instagram. And in judgments, the male is at least 30 years old or older. It's most often a former partner. It's in a conflict, which means it could be separation and rejection and jealousy, of course, but also other types of conflicts. And the medium is messengers, Snapchat or email. And unlawful breach of privacy is also committed by a male. He is between younger than 20 but up to 40 years old, so a relatively young perpetrator also for this crime. Most often an ex-partner, but could also be acquaintance. It's very often in a situation of separation, and the medium used is Snapchat and Instagram. And in the judgments is a young male too, ex-partner most often in a conflict. And the platform or medium used is Snapchat or a porn site. So this part ended up in the following recommendations. We need further knowledge about the perpetrator from other victim survivors than those in the victims' shelters to find out more about other than intimate partner violence. We would like to urge the administrative systems in the police and court systems to establish routines and administrative systems for noting the crime scene online. This is important for us to know more, because what we can see is that even though many of those cases are reported to the police, quite few of them in all cases, but especially for unlawful privacy breach, doesn't go to court, and we need to know why. So this was the report from Sweden. Thank you very much for your attention.
Actually, to be fair, that wasn't the entire report from Sweden. It was an abbreviated version, but the entire report from Sweden will be available on our site, NORDREF.org, for anyone interested. And also, the fact that there was a black dot in the corner of each slide in this presentation is due to the media embedded, and I know that it obscured the view in some cases, so you will be able to see the unobscured version on our site. And now, as promised, Moa Bladini, whom you just listened to, is going to answer just a couple of questions from David Brax, the senior advisor from the Swedish Institute of Gender Equality. Welcome, Moa and David, to this segment. Oh, sorry. Wait, I'm jumping over a slide. Here we go. There we go.
Hello, my name is David Brax, and I'm a senior advisor at the Swedish Secretariat for Gender Research. Thank you so much. I have a few questions about this research project. You suggest also that there could be improvement made to how crime data is collected and registered that would make this sort of research and in general the understanding of criminality better. Could you talk a bit about that? How could we improve how crime data is collected and organized?
Yeah, I think digital gender-based violence is very often ignored, or it's not really dealt with seriously, both because that's what have been the pattern of how you deal with gender-based violence, but also how you deal with digital violence. So I think it's really important to map these types of crimes. And what we saw when we started to collect the data from the police and from the courts was that they don't register the crime scene as internet. And well, I don't know that much about about their systems, but I think it shouldn't be that big a problem to just note this is on internet, online or offline. And if that is not a big problem, it would be a really important contribution to future research on the topic.
Thank you. Then I have a question about the section about victim blaming and the problem when it comes to sexual harassment and other types of sexual assault. That there is a tendency that the often female victim is being blamed or being held responsible for how she behaves, and that she is expected to explain why she believes that the things that happened to her was a case of harassment rather than something else. Do you think it's possible to get around this problem, considering that it's part of what sexual harassment is conceptually, that it's unwanted, it's unsolicited or unwelcome sexual attention? Do you think it's possible to move away from this focus on the victim?
The victim blaming, yes. I guess the victim blaming when it comes to sexual violence has a really long history. It's part of our culture, more or less, in different ways, of course. But what I've seen, because now the new, I call it new, but it's 5 or 6 years old, but the new criminalization or regulation of sexual crimes build on this idea of voluntariness, or like to try to separate what is legal and illegal. And then I've been studying rape, the implementation of the new rape laws, and I do notice that even if we now have this voluntariness as the foundation for what is criminal and not, many cases still deals with, you know, post the focus on her and what did you do to let him know that you were not voluntarily participating in this. But I also see in some cases that the focus is rather moved from her to him, the perpetrator, and ask him, what did you do to assure that she was really accepting this or willing to be participating in these actions? So that actually, I think that gives us hope, and that shows us that it's possible to move away, to remove the responsibility or the blame from the victim survivor to the perpetrator.
Right. Okay, last question then. You've mentioned that there are still very few cases concerning the unlawful breach of privacy, which is a rather new, just a couple of years old law in Sweden. Do you know why there are so few cases? It's often being described as a more or less of an epidemic. That is a problem that has arisen in recent years and exploded. But there seems to be still quite just only a few cases. Do you know why?
Yeah, I don't know why, but when I've been studying this problem previously, I've seen it's again connected to the challenges of how to deal with the digital violence, I think. So it's both about anonymity, who was actually behind this account, or, you know, but it's also, and then also about who was behind the computer at the time when the picture was sent or whatever was done. So I think it's actually having a lot to do with evidential problems, but not only that, because I also think that the problem of taking those kind of offenses seriously is also there and having an effect on this. So I think it's twofolded. And if we could actually, so I think this is an important result of our report, even if that was not our main aim. I think it's important to point out that even though we now have this new regulation that aims to deal with those kind of actions, the system still fails. So that's, yeah. It's a sad result, but it's an important result to highlight.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, David. It was really interesting to discuss with you.
Thank you, Mua and David, for that discussion. Listening to that, I think the major takeaways for me personally was that women are never as endangered as when they break off relationships with men. They're never as unsafe as when they try to divorce or separate from men that have held a romantic role in their life. Also, that the internet is not registered as the scene of a crime is coming through as a red thread and a recurring problem in all of our Nordic countries. And we will never know the scope of digital violence if we don't register the venue where it takes place. And last but not least, as Mua highlighted, is how incredibly important consent is in all of this. And she just uplifted the notion and fact that since Sweden introduced a consent-based legislation around sex, the discourse in courtrooms has moved away from asking the victim, what did you do to fight him off? Over to asking the perpetrator, how did you actually inquire that she wanted this? And that is a very welcome shift, and we would like to see that translated into a digital setting and for online consent culture to grow forth. But without further ado, it is my honor to now introduce the person who is going to show us the Icelandic results of this research. It is Dr. Maria Rún Bjarnadóttir. She is the Director of Internet Safety in Iceland with the National Police Commissioner. She's also a total rock star in these matters. She's the first Icelander to ever be appointed to the Grevio Committee, which oversees the Istanbul Convention, and she is a co-founder of NORDREF. So, Maria, if you would please join me on stage and show us the Icelandic results. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and I can assure you that I will not meet the standard of being a rock star, even if I will have to admit I am amazing at karaoke. Just to kind of, I think that's a good starting point at every presentation. I thank you for the opportunity to share that with the world. I'm going to talk to you about the Icelandic part of this research. These are kind of the this is kind of the short version of it. I want to talk a little bit about the background in Iceland and what makes Iceland special in a sense. Then shortly about the methodology, even though Christian kind of discussed that better here earlier, the results, and then some recommendations. So in terms of Iceland and what makes it unique, apart from the obvious things of volcanoes and that kind of stuff, that is the near universal deployment of high-speed internet broadband. And we sometimes have to go abroad to fully appreciate how amazingly connected Iceland really is. We have, the government has funded deployment of high-speed internet connections pretty much everywhere. We are connected everywhere, and I think it's only 0.7 part of the population that doesn't have access to either 4G or high-speed internet connections at all times. So I think that's important to keep in mind. We also need to keep in mind that there is a structural push towards the digital. So we have made an effort, both on a systematic and also individual, but notably on a systematic level, to shift services, public services, education, all sorts of important infrastructures are we shifting to the digital. Sometimes, as the Data Protection Authority has pointed out, we don't always think about the privacy implications of that. We, for example, introduce a whole service, a digital service to the young people of Iceland without fully reading the privacy kind of terms and conditions before we do so. So there's an inherent kind of trust in the digital, and there's also kind of this heavy use and reliance on it. And a recent report from the Media Commission, the Icelandic Media Commission, further highlights that Icelandic children use the internet and smartphones on a level that children in Norway, for example, do not. Over 90% of Icelandic children from the age of 9 to 18 watch YouTube at least 3 times a week. 90%. So I think it's really important that we kind of keep this in mind. We are pushing everywhere. We are both individually and structurally pushing young people and society onto the digital, and therefore it is paramount that we also make sure that the safeguards are in place where we are pushing for that shift. So the problems that we were facing that kind of call for this research is the first part is, of course, the increased number of digital gender-based violations, and this applies both to children and adults. And what is important to keep in mind is that the harms are not only personal, they are also social and cultural. The second problem is that the majority of public efforts that are focused on dealing with the consequences of the abuse, while we should be focusing our attention to preventing it from happening, and that would not only be beneficial from the point of view of the individuals, but also on a structural level. It is much, and this is harsh to say, but it is true, it is much cheaper for a society to prevent violations from happening rather than dealing with the consequences of them. So any taxpayer really should buy into this approach. So in terms of the literary review that was specific for Iceland, we were somewhat lucky that the National Commissioner for Police had introduced in the National Victim Survey a question regarding digital gender-based abuse. It's, of course, entirely a coincidence that I started working there the same year. But what it shows us that in this victim survey, 1% of the population have been victim of image-based sexual abuse. And thereof, 74% said that the violation had much or severe impact on them. And 2.1% had been threatened to have their intimate images shared without consent. And I know that 1% and 2.1% are maybe not big numbers, but they are when we talk about like individuals. So 1% of the population is, I failed maths, I will admit this. Nearly 4,000 people. And that is a lot when it comes down to it. That's the same amount of people that we had to move from the whole town of Reykjavík, for example. So it's important that we keep in mind that even though the number maybe isn't high, it is a lot of people. So the methodology that we applied in the Icelandic section was common for all the 3 data sets. What we did was that we identified the violations in the criminal law and then requested the data from both the police and from the courts on the clauses. But in terms of the data that we collected from the victims or in collaboration with the victim support services, we described the behaviors. So we didn't refer specifically to the clauses, but we described the behaviors that are qualified under the relevant penal law clauses. And these are the clauses that we addressed. So it's sexual harassment, it's sexual privacy, the legal reform introduced in 2021, aimed at online sexual violations specifically. It's the decency clause that a lot of the sexual privacy violations were qualified under the decency clause before this new legislation was introduced. And I was very kind of, I'm not going to say I took it personally, but I wasn't very happy with that approach because our decency clause is directly from a very old penal code and really is a Victorian clause that aims at kind of protecting women's morality and kind of their, you know, at the time where women had to kind of bring with them these salts to kind of sniff them up back into the reality because they all wore these really tight corsets. So, you know, it comes from such a different approach. It's not aimed at the victim. It's not aimed at protecting the rights of the victim, but kind of the moral. It's a morality clause, and it just isn't right to safeguard rights under that kind of clause. But of course, we don't want to take it out because there is nothing new in men flashing their penis unwanted. That happened in the Victorian times and has followed us now into the digital age, and this is the relevant clause for that. Then 2018B, that's the domestic abuse clause, and a lot of the violations have been qualified under the domestic abuse clause, as it does not call for, this kind of abuse qualifies under there, and then the threat clause. So through the victims, we identified these 4 types of perpetrators. When it comes to threats, and what is common, of course, is that in a vast majority, nearly all of the victims, or nearly all of the perpetrators that the victims identify, where they know, where they can tell us who the perpetrator is male. And what we see is a similar pattern as to the data that comes from, for example, Sweden, that when we are dealing with threats and sexual or violations of sexual privacy, what we sometimes call image-based abuse, the connection between the perpetrator and the victim are personal. So we see a connection there. They know each other. They have been in a romantic relationship together. They maybe have had some sort of intimate communication without it being romantic or even sexual. So there is a connection there. And we see, for example, in the threats, the data from the Bjarkarhlíð Family Justice Center, nearly 90% of the respondents had a personal or romantic relationship with the perpetrator. When we look at the sexual harassment and the abusive discourse or the gendered hate speech, there is a little bit there's a different kind of picture that we meet there. Similarly, the perpetrators are male. What's interesting also with the sexual harassment is 75% of the responders have been exposed to digital forms of sexual harassment. And in these cases, they don't have a strong relationship. They even don't know the person in question. So it's more of the this is some sort of entitlement issue from the perpetrator side. And the same with abusive discourse or gendered hate speech. We have over 60% of the responders experiencing that. And the perpetrator, of course, is male. I would love to say, or not of course, but it is. And in these cases, he's under the age of 40, either friendly with a woman or has no connection at all. So it seems when... So just roughly on the numbers, it's 262 answers from the victim through the victim survey. There are even a few more answers that is totally on me that I haven't had the time to go through, but I've scanned them and there is nothing that changes the bigger picture in that. So when we interpret the results, when we look at the identification from the victims, there are kind of three themes that kind of jump up on us. The first is the problem with all kinds of sexual violation, is that we don't have enough reporting to the police. And there are a number of reasons for that, and none of them is to blame the victim for. But we have to make the shift to make it so that if you are a victim of sexual abuse, you seek assistance, you go to the police, you report it, because otherwise we will never have a full understanding of the scope of the issue, and we will never be able to allocate the right amount of resources if we don't have the correct scope of the issues. The second theme that comes out is the elevated notion of harm for the victim in cases of intimate image abuse or threats. And I think this is a key issue to kind of take into consideration that often the sharing of the images or the threats, they are not, so the elevated notion of harm relies to the twofold violations that are taking place. So it is a sexual violation, but it's also a violation of privacy. So it is a twofold harm that we need to recognize, and the Icelandic legislation does that. But it's very important that the support that the victims get also recognizes that. And third, I think it's I think we need to look at these issues as a manifestation of a societal harm that is inflicted by misogyny, and there is no other way around it, really. And what Christian has been describing here earlier about the toxic masculinity and modern masculinity, I think this shows us that we are all of it. We are all victims of it. The police data shows us that, and the police data is also not, I haven't gone through all of it yet, but of the cases that I have examined, 100% perpetrators are male, 90% of the victims are female, and you see the relationship between the parties. There is 100% some sort of relationship between them. Either there is a romantic or intimate relationship, or there is a family relationship. And for me, for example, when I went through these cases, the amount of there were more cases in the data than I would have suspected, where the perpetrators were brothers or fathers than I would have guessed before. 5 minutes, plenty of time. In terms of the court data, this is something that I am actually happy about. It's that in the cases that we see that go to the court system, there is a 100% conviction rate. And I know it's not a lot, but it really is something. What it shows us, and kind of what I have found, is that it seems as though cases are not brought into the court unless there is, unless it's more likely that there will be a conviction than not. And of course, that's the law describing that. That's a prosecutor that goes into a courtroom with a case that that they don't think stands a chance would be in violation of their obligations. But nevertheless, it's very good to see that the courts are finding or are coming to the same conclusion, at least on that stage, because we need more cases to be funneled into that. But at least what we have is working. And this is just a little bit about the qualification of misogyny online and kind of how this has developed. I won't go into the details on that. So in conclusion, who are the perpetrators of digital gendered abuse in Iceland? They're male, and their victims are female. We see this or kind of, it varies, the relationship to the victims. It depends on or the form of abuse depends on the relationship the victim and the perpetrator have between themselves. Why do they do this? And I will tell you, I mean, it's reading through these cases, it's, it doesn't make you happy. It doesn't make you hopeful, because they are all so upset. They're so upset. She was so mean to me. and it's just so, it's really worrying, you know, what is happening? What's happening with the mindset of these men? Like, what is wrong with you? That's kind of what I was thinking in so many of these cases. Just talk to a psychiatrist like the rest of us do. In very many cases, that's really what I was thinking. Kind of get over your issues. You don't need to violate someone else in order to get over your own issues. And of course, sometimes they really just were joking and didn't mean it and just thought it was funny. And I don't know, that's equally bad to me. And like Þórdís mentioned, the breaking point of a relationship, when an intimate relationship breaks down, especially when there are children involved, that is a very serious point. I mean, we know that through domestic abuse, we know that through femicide. Women are in danger when they break off intimate relationships. And this translates to the online as well. And then how do they do it? You saw the modes that Moa mentioned from Sweden. It's exactly the same in Iceland. They're just using the everyday technology. They're not super tech advanced. One of the things that they rely on is this ubiquitous use of technology in Icelandic society. So posting something on Facebook will have professional, personal, and social implications for the victim. So they rely on this interconnectedness. And then finally, the recommendations for Iceland. I mean, these are just the top two. There are a number of others. One is the introduction and reinforcement of targeted preventive measures aimed at men and boys. And here we are both talking about general preventative measures like awareness campaigns and education drives, but we're also talking about these individual-based intervention programs, both in terms of preventing reoffending, but what we see from this breaking point of or this impasse that happens when intimate relationships are breaking down, one wonders if there should be some sort of intervention that takes place there, just as they are made to, there are all sorts of things that need to be sorted when a relationship breaks down. For example, if there are children involved, there's a custody, there are financial agreements. Perhaps that's a good point to intervene from the authorities I know how this sounds, maybe we need to kind of structure it a little bit better, but a way to make them understand how to use technology responsibly in an emotional crisis that they're going through. I'm sorry, I haven't formulated a more PC way to say this. I will at some point. And then the second recommendation is to facilitate and implement a multi-stakeholder effort that's aimed at engaging men and boys in the prevention of digital forms of gender-based violence. And what this really means is to find a way. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to figure out how that goes, but find a way to get men engaged, to get boys engaged. And not have it like yet another middle-aged woman coming into the classroom, telling them how to behave. We need to find a way for men to engage boys and boys to engage men, and for them to understand that this is their issue, this is their problem. It's just spilling over to women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. And I think we're going to have to challenge you to karaoke, if nothing else, to celebrate the 100% conviction rate of the Icelandic digital gender-based violence. Anytime. Perfect. Next up is the cultural segment of this event. And we are now going to introduce Brynhildur Björnsdóttir, who who has a long career in media. She's had her very own radio shows and television shows, as well as working as a journalist. She's authored a book about prostitution and is currently a member of parliament. So there's pretty much nothing this woman has not done. And I am going to boldly state that she is the only parliamentarian in the world who is also a mean burlesque dancer. And she is here today to read us the poem Dick Pics. So everybody welcome Brynhildur.
Dick Pics by Sarah Yimei Chiang. 2 dicks sitting in my daughter's inbox like men without hats, waiting for any door to open. Sighting a stranger's penis used to be rare. Remember raincoats? Like a flash of lightning, like a scratch and win ticket, sometimes glittering knockoff watches, sometimes a flapping penis shivering in the electric air. Overcooked hot dog, aborted fetus, close-up of a thumb, rolled bologna on a lonely deli plate. We have whole monologues for vaginas, but I can only imagine the penis as silent, which isn't the same as listening. The lighting is never good. No one ever drapes a dick in folds of linen with the head looking back, one pearl earring shining in stilled patience. In the schoolyard, a graffitied cock stands on balls pointing to the night sky, a fallen constellation. Women are for portraits, lounging nudes stuffed into frames, luminous and arch. They are heads, breasts, ass and feet, though never speech. You must pay and cross a velvet rope to see them. The penis stands alone in the filthy bars and bathrooms, in wooded parks, in the shadowed alleys, whistling a moon-white tune. Now, penises are everywhere, like posters for a one-act play, plastered on every telephone pole, bench, building, on every mailbox, on your kitchen chair, so that you have to push through piles of them, great snowdrifts of dick, just to reach across the room and tuck a stray hair into your daughter's braid.
Thank you, Brynhildur, for that powerful delivery. You had me at overcooked hot dog. And now I am happy to reintroduce Christian Mogensen to the stage. He formerly delivered the joint results of our research, and now he's back to give us the Danish ones. So welcome, Christian.
Thank you. And I did not bring a poem about dick pics. Brought the second best thing, statistics. Thank you so much. It's moving and very effective. As a short oversight, Denmark is very close to Iceland in its building. Everybody has broadband internet. Most kids are fervently online by the age of 10 when they get their first own digital device. Up until then, from about the age of 18 months, they just use their parents'. And the adult population have access to active internet use, broadband connections, and have digital identities up until about the age of 70. From 70 to 100, there's about a 60% penetration value in social media usage. So yeah, Denmark is very much online. And 2 of the primary sources for the literary review in Denmark was the Digital Violence in Denmark, a report by Digitalt Ansvar from 2020, where they found that 5% of Danes have experienced hateful comments or malicious lies regarding their person. There's an extremely interesting case of well, I'm tooting my own horn, but I used to do a lot of talks about this topic in schools, like digital behavior, digital upbringing, how do we make friends, how do we have social engagements online. And when talking about stuff like this, I'd always ask one of the boys, what could that be? Like a hateful comment or a malicious lie about your person. What could it be? Always, I have a small dick, or I heard someone like rape or something like that. That's what the boys are afraid of. Ask the girls, what could be a malicious lie about your person? Well, that I'm sexually active. And there is a dichotomy in those two fears based on a gender that is just to a T what we're talking about today. They furthermore found out that about 60% of Danes have experienced sharing of private information. Most often, like 96% of the occurrences, that was sharing of intimate images. We know for a fact through Moa's work, from Maria's work, from my work, that is predominantly, when done onto females, of a sexual nature. And currently in Denmark, we're seeing an, I don't want to say uptick, because it's been going on for about 10, 15 years, but there is a series of attacks targeted at women in politics, women in culture, women in media, that either threat them with sharing true or false AI-generated imagery of them being naked or sexually active. We know that it's the same group of people being behind that. They target the same profile of women. They do it with the same signature. Like, we know who it is, but we can't prove it because they use a VPN. And then Danish police goes, well, the women can just not be on their inboxes. Like, shouldn't be a problem. And we've actually seen an uptick over the last couple of years in young men being targeted with sextortion. Sextortion is that if the perpetrator gets a finger, a nail, just like a tiny sliver of a sexual imagery from you, he will use that to extort another. And then he has 2, and then he'll ask for 4, and then he'll ask for 10. It used to be 5 years or more ago that was exclusively done unto women, particularly young women, who are very much afraid to have this scarlet brandedness of sexually active or sexually interested. It's starting to happen more and more to young men as well. Usually via webcam, usually done via webcam services, TV, chat, Omegle, stuff like that. So we are achieving a level of gender equality in Denmark. It is just the worst kind imaginable. In Denmark, we have reached out to courts and police to receive any sort of information regarding penal codes 232s, 264D, and 266, and then we've manually curated them as to when it, or whether or not it is a crime of digital nature. And what we found was that more than half of the respondents, when talking about threats, it was done so digitally. The prototypical perpetrator, when threatening someone online, is between the ages of 18 and 50. He threatens women that he's been in a romantic relationship with, or a woman that considers him a friend or an acquaintance. Usually then he would ask her, do you want to be in a relationship? Do you want to have the sex? And when she'd say no, he'd be like, well, I'm just going to rape you instead. That is also considered a threat. The only reason why we don't have any males under the age of 18 here is that often in Denmark that is then cataloged as a youth crime instead of a sex crime or a digital crime. So, and that is treated in a separate court, where from the cases are even harder to get. When it came to sexual harassment, usually dick pics, 45% of the respondents that we reached out to had been exposed to digital forms of sexual harassment. That would account for a lot of the women from the victim shelters. And the perpetrator here is also male. It is almost exclusively a dick pic. When it came to sexual privacy or image-based sexual abuse, under half of the respondents from victim shelters had been victims of that as well. Usually there'd be threats and usually there'd be harassment. In under half of the cases, there'd be sexual privacy issues. When that happened, it was a man doing it unto a woman, and only 15% of the respondents from the victim shelters could confirm that it was someone they did not know. In a lot of the cases, they didn't know if it was their ex-partner or some of his compatriots, because the imagery much like the poem said, is only of a dick, potentially a dick and balls. It's been, but it is. That is what we call it. I don't think we should draw the line at what we call it. We should draw the line at actually sending it. I've been giving talks in high schools for years. I always asked the audience openly, who here has received a dick pic? On average, we'd hit about 2/3 of the women, sometimes more, sometimes a little bit less, but about 2/3 of young women in Denmark have received an unsolicited, unwanted dick pic. That is a lot. The only reason why these numbers aren't higher is because we're not categorizing it. We're not cataloging it. Because it is just youthful exuberance to send a dick pic. Oh, youth, like with all their hormones and stuff. It only becomes a problem when it's part of another case, a bigger case. Like it's only a problem when it becomes part of the bigger problem. That is a giant minefield of big problems waiting to happen. When it came to, I'd rather talk about the police data. It was extremely hard getting the police data in Denmark. We requested 150 cases. We were denied in more than 75% of the case requests on grounds of the respect of the parties within the case, even though the cases are anonymized. But the police didn't want to share the data because it might be uncomfortable for the parties. And I had a long conversation with Tordis about that last night, where we talked about, in working on this, is it right to ask the victims to be part in solving their own crime? And my immediate reaction was, of course not. Like, that is the police's job. And Tordis made a very, to me, important distinction that it's also an act of agency. It's also an act of empowerment in a crime done unto you to say, well, you can actually be part of the solution, that it's not going to happen to everybody else. And in the case of Denmark, the police have made the distinct decision that women will not have agency in these cases. We will not use the crimes that they have suffered to prevent the next wave of gender-based assault or violence. We've complained about all of the cases where we've been denied access to the case files, but it takes a very, very long time. If we were frustrated to begin with when working with dick pics and digitally based sexual abuse, working with police is even more so frustrating. What we do see is that there are some common denominators. Much like Sweden, much like Iceland, the most dangerous thing a woman can do in regards to these crimes is to leave a man. The second most dangerous thing she can do is to say no to his advances. So damned if you do, damned if you don't. We saw exclusively female victims, and we saw almost exclusively male perpetrators in all of the cases that we've logged. In one case, the mother of one of the perpetrators would also share the imagery because her son was not a perpetrator, the woman was just a harlot, so shame on her. When looking at the court data, we have fairly high conviction rates, I thought, until I saw like 100% bullseye, in everything but threats, which astounds me because a digitally made threat should have a higher conviction rate than somewhere in the 40s. It's right there. There's a text message saying, I'm going to come and do XYZ to you. In Denmark, there has been several cases where it's not a threat if it doesn't have a distinct timing. You can say, I'm going to come and kill you. That's fair game, unless you say, I'm going to come and kill you on Tuesday. So if you know the rules, it's just a game of playing cat and mouse. We do see fairly high conviction rates in Section 232, which is indecent exposure, the dick pics, or Section 264D, the image-based sexual assaults. That's good. If a case is brought to court, they'll get a conviction. That is a narrative that is woefully underrepresented in Denmark. When we ask young people in Denmark, they are certain that the police will neither investigate nor bring to court any sort of image-based sexual abuse. We know it's wrong. We can see that it's wrong. But 5 years ago, that was very right. And in Denmark, we have a huge monumental effort to convince those who are most often targeted by these crimes that we, the society, the police, like everybody else, we actually care about you. Because 5 years ago, we didn't. And the story, the mouth-to-mouth, the older sister, the cousin, someone who suffered the same fate as you saying they didn't care in my case, sure, then we can have police inspectors and detectives tell them, we do care now. There is a tall order for whoever's communication responsible within Danish police to bridge this gap. You've heard the conclusion 5 times over by now. Digital crime is increasingly taken serious in Denmark. That's good. When a sexual or gendered perspective is introduced, women are by far disproportionately targeted and almost exclusively by men. We know that there's a dire need for more transparent cooperation with Danish police. Data collection, data efforts, research suffers under an ongoing discussion in Denmark about the categorization of digital, sexual, or gendered crimes, if they are a digital crime, or a sexual crime, or a domestic crime, or just youthful, shit happens and we just had fun, we were drunk, right? Like, there are so many chairs to sit in between, and we don't really know what the problem is because, yeah, it's kind of digital, it's kind of sexual, it's everything and nothing at the same time. In Denmark, we also see that efforts to analyze, understand, communicate any efforts to mitigate these problems are done by civil society organizations and non-government organizations and angry activists. That's the problem. It's not a political level problem yet. The only reason why the world has started talking about this is because it happened to Taylor Swift. And if it can happen to Tay-Tay, well, then it's a problem. I'm a Swiftie, I love good pop music, but that is what it takes for the world to be talking about AI-generated naked images of women. Women have been talking about it for a long time. The rest of the world kind of came on board because it happened to someone we know and respect as a pop musician, more so than a female. The recommendations are short and sweet. Cyberspace is a crime scene, treat it as such. We need more man groups to be healthy and to have a healthy outset. One thing I've noticed also in my own life is that men don't talk about feelings dedicatedly. We'll talk a lot about feelings, but only if we're doing something else. We're playing FIFA, we're putting up a new shelf, we're changing the oil on the Toyota, stuff like that. When we can do that, we can open up about, well, actually, my wife just left me, or she said that this and this, and that made me feel this. We're never gonna sit down and be like, let's have an emotionally investigative conversation. Maybe that's just how it is. Maybe we can't change that, but then we need to set up groups where we can do that. I've worked with gaming as an environment where men can have these conversations, and NORDREF is doing an amazing project on just that. Toris is going to introduce that in a second. I've done it after training when I was a coach in Thai boxing. The 15 minutes after a 2-hour class was the perfect window to talk about being vulnerable as a male. Maybe because we spent 120 minutes punching each other, affirming our very masculine identity, and then we're like, yeah, maybe we can talk about emotions now. Fair. Like, let's do it. Like, let's have man groups. Let's talk about masculinity in a healthy way. Let's enable men to become killjoys. I love that term, and I've stolen it from third wave feminism. Men as killjoys, men calling out their friends, being like, dude, that's not cool. Like, I get that she's hot and you want a picture, but don't. Like, yeah, sure, we can afford to bring down the mood just 5% in the name of saving our gender, our masculinity, and everybody else in society. Male killjoys shouldn't be a new terminology. We can nurture healthy relationship between ourselves. We don't need someone to come in and say, like Maria said, don't do this, you must do that, because then we're going to push back. If it's me doing it to my friend, that's better. And we need to understand, as men in Denmark, toxic masculinity, this man box, it hurts everybody and it hurts a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. I'm going to ask you to not leave the stage. I'm going to ask you to stand here centrally, and you will be joined now by 2 of our previous guests. Actually, one of our previous guests, Maria Run, will be joining Christian for this next segment, where they will be questioned by no other than Dr. Bjarki Thor Grönfeldt. He holds a PhD in political psychology and is an assistant professor at Bifröst University in Iceland. He was also recently appointed assistant to the Icelandic Minister of Social Affairs and Labor Market. He is one of our very few Nordic experts on incel culture, to name one of the facets that we have been working with here today. So I would love to have you, Bjarki, on the stage to now give these people a proper questioning after we get the tent raised. We have two more, so they're just going to have to go around. Yes. Go.
I love the background sound. Yes. Very kind of setting the scene.
Grassroots, am I right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much to all of the speakers that have spoken here today. And Þórdís introduced me briefly, but just to set the stage a little bit. So one of the things that I got dragged into in my PhD was a project on incels and incel cultures. And we've been doing some, interesting research from the more of the sort of psychological perspective on that. And I've read your report, Christian, on the Angry Internet, for example. And so I sort of like approached this topic sort of from almost the other end, almost from the perpetrators. And I hope I don't, convey a misunderstanding from this point of view. But I'm sort of like on the end of researching the perpetrators. And as I was listening to you, I started thinking, because I assume, read a lot of the court documents, for example, and you've kind of gotten into what these men, that, especially the ones that are convicted for sexual harassment online with the dick pics and so on. I'm wondering, because I know you've kind of dived into this, I know you've dived a little bit, at least into the chatboard cultures, right, where some, with the helm of anonymity, sort of everything is allowed and all bets are off. Do you see any traces of this culture in the sort of the court documents and what the victims' accounts of what happened?
Both yes and no. I know that's the worst academic answer you can give. I'm sorry.
Everything is allowed here.
I'm going to qualify it a bit. A lot of the cases that we've seen are the ones that have been brought to court, and for something to be prosecuted, we see a lot of the chat board cases not reaching the courts because the police or investigators will say, well, we don't know who to investigate. We can't drag 4chan into a court in Sweden or in Iceland or in Denmark. So it kind of becomes a victim problem. You've had a very bad experience and we can see that. We can't do anything about it because in effect, in the word of the law, no one has done it unto you. So we don't see it in a lot of the data that we have now, but we see the similarities in a lot of especially the I did it for fun cases, where it's not necessarily done to target the woman. She is just a tool to integrate the man into a masculine culture. He had sex with her, they recorded imagery or videos. Fair enough, if there is consent, sure, do that. But then the crime happens when he uses that as a means to buddy up to all of the others, look what I did, and all of the other men can be I have also had the sex. We are now in the same boat. And it becomes sort of a thing that you can talk about together, where the woman is, again, made into an object that the man can use to rise in social hierarchies. Because whether we want it or not, cases right now that sex raises the value of a man in social norms, in masculine culture, less so for women. So both yes and no, but it's the same trait. Women are used as a tool to further a social adherence for men.
Thank you. Maria?
I agree.
Agree fully.
Nothing to add. Yeah, it's exactly the same in Iceland.
Right, because you mentioned the type that says I did it for fun. I did it for shits and giggles. there is some interesting research coming out showing that those who send the dick pics, for example, they have higher dark personalities, which should not come as a surprise. But the characteristics of that are low empathy, prone to objectifying others, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. It's about controlling the receiver and showing dominance, as you said, like reinforcing your masculinity.
Yeah, and an interesting part of that is also when you send a dick pic, as if that's something everybody does once in a while, you can also take on the role of like the Schrodinger's perpetrator. Like, if you like the dick pic, I totally meant to send it. And like, it is definitely a flirtation, like an expression of sexual interest. If you don't like the dick pic, it was for fun. So like, depending on your reaction, I can take a new role. So like, no matter what happens, I'm not the bad guy. I'm either, worst case, I'm bad at flirting and kind of awkward, or I'm a Chad or a stud.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And that also links into kind of this, when it's the unwanted dick pic or the sexual harassment, there isn't a personal connection between them. Or there is, there's a loose personal or vague personal relationship existing. So it's exactly like he says, I think, for example, that they use this as kind of a fallback. I'm taking my chance, but if it fails, it's not because I'm a failure, it's because she's such a prude. So there's I think absolutely there's a connection between those two.
Right, and one of the things I think that we have to discuss, but I always sort of like fall back when I get this question because I'm a social scientist and we're sort of like meant to describe the world and not necessarily offer solutions, but the question always comes in the end, right? Like what can we do and what can we do about these things? So I'm curious, what do you think could be some effective interventions here? Like, is it all about education, or do we need to take a step even further? Like, is there something, because we know there is a setback in terms of human rights, or especially women's rights and LGBTQ rights here in Iceland in terms of like more, let's say, regressive social attitudes. Let's see if we manage to fix that soon. But could you name any interventions, let's say, or prevention strategies that come to mind?
If I start, for me, it is about engaging boys and men. It all comes down to it. We have had so many attempts of well-meaning, well-educated, amazing middle-aged women going into the schools and telling them how to behave, and they don't. So that doesn't work. We need to find another way to engage them, and I think we need to do that by just asking them themselves. And I think, we see the androtatification of culture, like Christian mentioned here. I think it runs much deeper with young people than we actually realize. And I think we have a lot of, like I mentioned earlier, over 90% of Icelandic children are watching YouTube, and I think that is their prime form of education and entertainment. They are not watching what the mainstream, so to say, is trying to have them watch. So I think the ideas that are being entrenched with young men today, I think that is happening without many of us within the kind of within the mainstream or within kind of what's accepted are really having any idea about. So I think we need to get them, we need to ask them, and we need to then take it forward with them. And I know that's kind of counterintuitive to a issue that kind of negatively affects women or girls to kind of engage boys and men, but that is what it comes down to, and I honestly think that there is a cultural and societal issue, and I don't know if it's a shift because I'm not a sociologist, but what it is, but there is something, and it is big, and it's happening right in front of our eyes, and I feel we are asleep. and we are not kind of really understanding the severity of this. And then we are kind of just grasping at some of the fringes. You know, the boys are not doing all that well at school. You know, we need to lower the demand so that they feel kind of better and more secure. I think all of these things are linked. And I think, for example, I mean, I lived in England for quite a while and raised my children there. And moving back here to Iceland, it is astonishing to see some of the things that are appropriate and accepted within the Icelandic school system. I mean, it's just, of course, I raised my children in England. There's a stark difference, but it is astonishing. And it's also astonishing that it's so normalized here in Iceland that we are focusing all of our efforts on our boys becoming pro football players and pro sports players. So everything else can come second. Their behavior on and off the field, how they are doing at school, because they are such talented football players. And I think there is something in the, I don't know if it's the culture of what exactly it is, but I think we are not doing it right when we are raising the boys today. Other than me, of course, and my boy, of course, is
he's perfect.
You know, you know. So I mean, it's hard to talk about this without kind of going to a personal level, and it's hard to, you know, because from a legal perspective, I have no idea what I'm talking about. But I think there is, you know, coming from a legal background, I don't have the prerequisites for kind of addressing this specifically, but I think this is the issue, but I don't know exactly, you know, the parameters of it. But Christian does.
Thank you so much, and we have to conclude soon, so that's okay. So about 1 minute answer.
Yeah, that's good that the sociologist asks the philosopher for a 1 minute answer. I think one of the most important distinctions is that there's an attitude, Maria is touching on it, of cuddling or even talking down to young men. Like, let's not ask too much of them. Like, let's just lower the threshold. Let's lower the bar onto the fucking floor and then say, if you don't rape anyone, you did good today. You were a good man. But I came kind of close. Yeah, but you didn't. So, like, high five, chest to bump. I think we could speak more into the narrative of men, young men, boys, as capable if we said, we actually expect you to ask about consent. And they'll immediately say, yeah, but I'm afraid because I might get a no. Yeah, that is what bravery is about. Like, sure, yeah, exactly. And we need to cultivate that rather than keep navigating and changing and bending the rules so that they won't step over them. Like, demand more. Don't tell me I'm a good guy because I don't like Andrew Tate. Well, of course I don't. Like, I can tie my own shoes. I mean, just expect more and be very open about, we expect you to not only not do bad, we expect you to do good. And yeah, sure, that comes with a price. You're gonna have to be a killjoy. You're gonna have to abstain from having sex if she's too drunk to give consent. You can't share the image that proves that you're a giant stud. No, but instead of being a good stud, wouldn't you rather be a good man? Like, raise the bar a bit. We can do it.
Okay, let's raise the bar. I think these are good concluding words. So, Christian, Maria, thank you so much. Over to Þórdís.
Oh, that was so inspiring, and I can't believe we're actually finishing on time, everyone. Congratulations, that is a feat in events like these. As Christian seeded, there is an ongoing project with NORDREF where we are actually taking these research results a step further. We call it the game changer because we do see a major overrepresentation of men under the age of 25 in some of these categories of online abuse that we have gone over today. And where do we find men under the age of 25? Predominantly online, and the answer is in gaming communities. So we are harnessing the power of gaming communities to get through to young men with material that for one, teaches them better digital sexual etiquettes so that they will actually inquire about consent, but also general boundaries and maybe, as Maria has mentioned, how to better deal with emotional crises. Because if men and boys who have been emotionally rejected can't deal with heartbreak in a way that does not cause harm to others, then there's work to do in the area of raising the emotional intelligence of our young men and boys. And I will leave that as our concluding words. This has been recorded. It will be subtitled for those who are hard of hearing, and it will be uploaded onto NORDREF.org and cut down into more palatable and accessible units for social media as well. So keep posted, keep following us. You will find us on all of the major social media outlets. And if anyone wants to linger and talk to the speakers today and question them personally, I know that some of them will be available after this event for your leisure. Thank you so very much, and goodbye.